Part 2. How do language differences in bilingual programs affect student achievement? So another aspect of this in culture has to do with language. In 1979, only 9% of the Americans of ages 4 to 24 were families in which the primary spoken language was not English. In 2007, it's increased to 20%. In 2026, it will be 25%. And 65% of those families, of those 25, so 65% of the 25%, speak Spanish. The term language minority is used for all such students. There's several words or acronyms that we use to describe these kids. Limited English Proficiency, which is LEP. ELL or EL, English learners or English language learners, are terms that are used for the much smaller number who have not yet obtained an adequate level of English. And then we have ESOL, English speakers of other language. So they speak English, but they're speakers of other language. When we talk about bilingual education, there's been a lot of controversy about bilingual education. English immersion is the one that's used mostly by schools. English learners are taught primarily or entirely in English. So it's pretty much the put them in the frying pan model, where you just put kids in and they'll assimilate and then they learn the language as you go through. A lot of schools, like in California and some in South Florida as well, do a transitional bilingual education where children are taught reading or other subject in their native language for the first years and then are transitioned into English, usually in their second or third or fourth grade. So if they come in with that, like in kindergarten, they'll do like a transitional program. Paired bilingual education, our children are taught reading and other subjects in both their home language and in English. And they're usually at different times of the day. It's not like they do it once and then they do the other. And then two-way bilingual education, which I think would be kind of cool, is that all students learn both English and another language. So English-speaking kids learn Spanish and Spanish-speaking kids learn English. Research on bilingual strategies for teaching reading generally supports paired bilingual methods. Which is the children are taught reading and other subjects in both their home and in English, but usually at different times of the day. So they kind of get it twice. This suggests that English learners may not spend many years building their English, but can learn English reading with a limited level of English speaking skills, but then can build their reading and speaking capabilities together. So they learn the material in their native language and then they practice it in English. However, this is the reason why it's expensive to do that, because you have to hire, the kid has to take 2 English or 2 reading classes that goes along with that. And they have to have whatever that native language is, and then plus another teacher. And they found actually that usually by around grade 4, that there was no difference with the English immersion and the paired bilingual education. So even though the kids seemed to grasp it sooner when they were first learning the paired bilingual education compared to the English immersion, that by grade 4 those differences pretty much washed out. So some of the things that you can do with this is don't just say it, show it so that the kids can see it. If you've ever used like Rosetta Stone and stuff like that, you will see that they always pair a picture with the word so that the kids are seeing and getting a cognitive map, like a schema of what the word is about. Provide safe opportunities to use academic English so that you give kids, like that's why Kagan's paired learning is really important, so that they can sit and talk about it and not be put on the spot in front of the entire class. You want to develop vocabulary so that vocabulary is really rich in the sense that it doesn't matter either for all of your students. It's always good to develop a richer vocabulary. But with your ELL kids, sometimes when we're giving directions, you got to make sure they're clear and stuff, that we assume that they'll know a word, like it could be categorize, and you're like, a kid that is just learning English may not know what it means to categorize. They might not know what compare and contrast means. So we have to develop that vocabulary that goes with each academic subject. Identifying cognates is a good idea. That English is a language that is shared has the roots of many other languages. So the cognates are the root words that go along with other languages, because most of these languages, like Spanish and English and stuff, have Latin roots. So if you learn the Latin roots of words, you will understand their cognates. So that's why a lot of times in one language, the word is very similar to the same word in English. Another thing is to make sure that we never embarrass kids. It's the same as when you're working with a little kid when we talked about correcting their speech, when like say, I goated to the store, and you say, you went to the store. You never want to embarrass a kid by correcting their English in front of everyone. You just want to just repeat it in the correct form. And then we're going to provide small group instruction in reading when it's needed, that we're going to pull the kids out and we're going to give them that hurdle help to help them over the barriers that they have. Another aspect of bilingual education that comes across too is this idea of multicultural education. In Florida in particular, there's actually legislation that requires schools to do multicultural education, and it's been a much discussed topic in the U.S. because some would say, we're so tired of teaching multicultural education, we'll be teaching American education. Well, we are pretty much a quilt of other countries. And a home of immigrants, so it would be very difficult to figure out what is American. So the definitions of multiculturalism vary broadly, but the simplest definition is emphasizing non-European perspectives in the curriculum. For example, the works of Africans, Latinos, Asians, and Native American authors in English curricula. So what they're really trying to do is that idea, what I was talking about with hidden figures and stuff, is telling the story of the American people from multiple viewpoints. And some of the ways that we can do that is through content integration, where we use examples, data, and information from a variety of cultures. Knowledge construction, though, helping kids understand how knowledge is created and how it's influenced by your racial and ethnic and social class positions. I think that's one of the biggest things that is happening right now, even if you could look at our healthcare and you hear we had a senator who is obviously one of the 5% upper middle class people, or the upper echelon, and he said, "No, there's no one. You can't tell me anybody's died from lack of health care." Well, yeah, you can. I was in the ER not too long ago with my mother-in-law, and there was a woman in there, and she had thyroid cancer, and it was probably about a year and a half ago, maybe 2 years ago, and she had thyroid cancer, and they said, you have this huge goiter on your thyroid. She goes, "Yeah, I know about that. I have cancer." And the doctor said, "Oh, well, maybe that has to do with your headache." And she was in there she had a really bad headache, and she wanted migraine medicine. And she was sitting in the hallway because the ER was overflowed. And he asked her something about what she was doing about her cancer. And she said, "Oh, I can't do anything about the cancer." She said, "Even with the minimal insurance I have, there's nothing I can do." So prejudice reduction is a goal of multicultural education, that we advance positive relationships in students and develop those tolerant attitudes, so that we want to learn from each other, not rate each other or dismiss each other. And so we have to talk about equity pedagogy, which is teaching techniques that facilitate academic success of children from different ethnic and social class groups. We want to close that opportunity gap. So when you're giving an assignment, you might want to think if it calls for like an internet research, well, some of your kids may not have internet at home. So how are you going to provide that without lowering the standard because we want to be technology literate? How are you going to provide them the time to be able to do that without expecting them to do that at home? Which is one of the reasons why a lot of schools went to like developing open lab time for computers and stuff at night. And that's empowering school cultures, where we have school organizations and practices that are conducive to the academic and emotional growth. A lot of schools will do things like wraparound services, where they offer, vision and hearing and screening tests at the school. They have computer labs that are open. They have summer camps that are free. One of the ones I'm thinking about, we sponsor the Nina B. Hollis Institute as a Da Vinci Club, which is a reading and literacy and arts club where you read a book and they have book clubs, and then they do a project, and it can be a STEM project or an art project that goes along with it. And the kids stay after school and do that. And we've shown really good reading gains in reading. Another aspect this chapter talks about is the idea of gender and gender bias. Children's sex is a visible and permanent attribute in the sense, well, it can be non-permanent, but it tends to be permanent. Cross-cultural research indicates that gender roles are the first that develop. So when we look at this, your identity as a boy or a girl is usually one of the first things that's developed by about age 3 or 4. And all societies tend to treat males and females differently. But we know that gender roles and sex role behavior is a learned behavior. And so that when they come to you at 5 in school, they've already learned these behaviors. And so we want to say what is considered natural behaviors based more on cultural belief and on biological necessity. There are, though, however, evidences in temperament and personalities between boys and girls, and there's a debate about whether there's aptitude or achievement differences. There are negligible differences in intellectual ability. Males score higher on general knowledge, mechanical reasoning, and mental rotation measures. Guys can actually mentally rotate objects in their head, and they use both sides of their brain. When we do PET scans, both sides light up when they're doing mental rotation of objects. Females score higher on language measures and reading measures. So when they're processing language, both sides of the female's brain will light up when only one side of the guy's will light up. Females tend to underestimate their skills in high school, and males tend to overestimate their skills. So that's more of a personality characteristic, and we don't really think that that's an innate ability. Males have higher rates of learning disabilities and emotional disturbance, and African Americans in particular have a higher rate of ADHD. I do a lot of research on gender and gender differences, and one of the things that we do know is that there are developmental differences in gender. Like you ask any kindergarten teacher about fine motor skills of girls in kindergarten, and at age 5, and there's fine motor skill differences. Boys have better gross motor skills differences at age 5, and it's interesting though because fine motor skills are things that you would use in school, like being able to write and paint and draw and all that kind of stuff, where gross motor skills like jumping and climbing are not necessarily school positive. They're not school ready. They're not something that you typically use in school. And so when boys are more active in that sense, then they tend to get in trouble more in school but those are the things that they're good at, and they're not real good at the fine motor skills. But as you get older, those things equal out. So we know that about by age 25 to 30, that males and females developmentally are about equal, and that's where their intellectual differences are about equal. Your book talks a lot about how men tend to score higher on the SAT in mathematics and do better generally in test taking than girls do. And there is some hypotheses about why that is, and some would say it has to do with how men and women process stress differently. But like I said, typically by the time, and there's too many variables, like there's women that actually do better at that than men are, and there are some men that don't do as well. So we know that there are cultural differences as well. The boy crisis is something that has gotten a lot of press lately, probably for the last 30 years, about how girls were, for the last 30 years, up until probably 10 years ago, girls were underserved in school. But more recently, probably in the last 10 years, there's more concern about boys because more boys are assigned to special ed, more boys are held back, more boys drop out, and more boys get in trouble with the law. And right now, the ratio of men to women at college, it's tend to be 60% of the college population is women and 40% is men. So we have to wonder about that. In particular, African American males are in much bigger crisis than the other males are. They are more risk at They're more risk than the African American girls. They're more risk in learning disabilities, and they have a higher rate of ADHD, and they also have a higher suspension rate. Although boys are actually improving on many of these indicators, such as dropout and college attendance, girls are improving faster. So what are we going to do? We're going to avoid gender bias in teaching. And teachers are usually, without being aware of it, exhibit gender bias in the classroom. Your book talks about how they call on boys more. And I don't think it's out of favoritism, is what we have found, because we do a lot of gender research as well. It's not necessarily out of favoritism, but out of survival, because the boys tend to call out more and stuff like that, and so not pay attention as much. So girls do more teacher pleasing behavior, so it would be more like Johnny, 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 because you're trying to keep Johnny alert. which is one of the reasons why we suggest that you use random generators in class. And a random generator is like popsicle sticks that have a kid's name on it, or a deck of cards that write their kid's name on it, because that way you can stop this. You can stop doing that. Maintaining sex separation, your book talks about. I don't actually agree with that, because we do have some gender segregated classrooms, and we find that the stereotypes that come out in society almost hit you in the face with them, like, overly aggressive boys or hyperactive boys. And so you can address them head on. Girls being catty, you can address them head on in a class. And so then we can overcome, like, girls are not natural risk takers. And I think if you go on TV or on YouTube and you look at stupid male tricks, you'll see, boys sticking firecrackers up their butt or jumping off of roofs and stuff like that. And women tend to not do that. So when we treat them differently, when we do separate them, what we find is we can address those stereotypes head on. But Slavin suggests that you don't do that. Avoiding stereotypes, you can assign jobs in the classroom without regard to gender. But I would actually look for it too. One of the little girls in our all-girl class said, when I was in the all-girl class, I was in trouble all the time. And now that I'm in the mixed gender class, the teacher always blames the boys. I love it. So I think one of the things that happens is stereotypes gets masked if it isn't brought out in the open. So we have to talk about that. He talks about promoting integration across sex collaboration, seating, and sports activities. I don't have a problem with that as much as I do, though, that when you do that, a lot of times the stereotypes are there anyways. They come in with it from society at age 4. So I think sometimes it takes it to be separate for you to actually address them. A young man that we talked to that was in an all-boys academy was a saxophone player, but he went to the band director, and the band director asked for somebody to play the flute, and he would never play the flute because the flute was a chick instrument. But because he was in this all-boy academy now, somebody had to play it. Some guy had to play it. So he goes, all right, I'll do it. Take one for the team. And he did, and he actually became this unbelievable flautist, and he got a full ride scholarship to the Juilliard Music Academy for flute playing, and he became like a professional flute player, flautist. So would he have done that if he was in a mixed gender class or a mixed gender school? I don't think he probably would have. But we can still treat males and females equally, allowing them equal opportunities to participate in class, take on leadership roles, and engage in all kinds of activities. How do kids differ in intellectual and learning styles? Intelligence is one of those words that people believe and understand until you ask them to define it. At one level, it's defined as a general aptitude for learning or any ability to acquire and use knowledge and skills. A consensus definition is that intelligence is the ability to figure out what you want out of life by purposely using your strengths to compensate for your weaknesses. More of a book definition, your IQ or your intelligence quotient is a broad range of skills and performances expressed in a single score. Howard Gardner and some of his colleagues have come up with the multiple intelligence idea, and he would say that logical mathematical intelligence is the ability to manipulate numbers and symbols. Linguistic is ability to speak and write well. Existential is ability to reflect on abstract ideas. The interpersonal or intrapersonal is the ability to recognize one's thoughts, feelings, and interests. The interpersonal is the ability to interact well with other people. You can have a musical intelligence, which is ability to apply concepts of rhythm, pitch, melody, and harmony. You can have a spatial intelligence, the ability to manipulate three-dimensional items in space. And then bodily kinesthetic, ability to coordinate movement. So athletes would have bodily kinesthetic intelligence. And then the newest one he added, because it used to be 8, is the naturalistic. It's the ability to distinguish features in nature. So what Gardner professed, and some of his friends profess, is that children usually have a strength in one or more of those areas, and that you should design your curriculum based on all those different intelligences so that you can make sure that every child has an opportunity to shine. The origins of intelligence, where it comes from, has been debated for decades. Some psychologists believe that it is heredity, that the apple doesn't fall far from the tree, that you get your intelligence through your parents. Proponents of the eugenics movement really wanted to weed out feeble-mindedness, so they were trying to sterilize people who they thought did not have good genetics, that were not going to have high IQs. Others hold that intelligence is shaped mostly by factors in your social environment, that by the experiences that you have help bring out your intelligence. But most investigators now would probably agree that you have some hereditary ability, and then your environment plays an important role as well. It's nature and it's nurture, because like children who travel a lot and have a lot of experiences have more to draw upon, and so then they make more connections, and that usually leads you to a higher IQ. Another aspect of this is learning styles that they like to throw in. Just like kids have different personalities, they have different ways that they like to learn. Think about how you learn the names of people you meet. Do you learn a name better when you see it written down? If so, you might be a visual learner. Do you kind of memorize their faces? Do you hear, it better with a name? Anna, Babana. Are you doing some kind of a word play where you're listening to something that you might be an auditory learner? You could be a kinesthetic learner when you're like writing down and you're feeling it, or you're, like sand or something like that. We all learn in different ways. The research on this, actually matching learning styles to learning, has been very inconsistent. And they really haven't found any benefits of it. However, that search for the aptitude treatment interaction, that's what they call that, the aptitude treatment, what are you apt to do better at, it still goes on, because we do know, though, that everybody you learn through all of those modalities, so it's better to hit all of them. But the common sense conclusion from research is that you should be alert to detecting and responding to the different ways that children learn. We have understanding diverse thinkers. Many faltering students, specialized mind brains that are exquisitely wired to perform certain tasks masterfully. And then we also say that some kids are miswired when they're not meeting our expectations. But research suggests that there are addressing the problems in 3 ways. Broad student assessment, identified talents, not just deficits. A lot of times in schools we tend to focus on what kids can't do instead of what they can do. And we have to re-examine the curriculum and explore instructional practices and curriculum choices, giving kids choices of how they can express what they've learned. The universal design for learning, which we'll hit on in chapter, I think it's 12, talks about this a lot, that, it's multiple means of delivering instruction, and then multiple means of expressing yourself, and then letting the kids express themselves differently, and then multiple means of assessment, so that you're letting kids, assess them in the best way that they can tell you how they've learned that construct. And we have to provide professional development for educators so that we can, there's a lot of research on the brain and what we're learning from the brain, and we're going to cover that probably more in chapter, I think it's 6, and some of the brain research, but we just know that we're just hitting the tip of the iceberg on this. All right, that's the end of chapter 4. There's a lot in this chapter on diversity, and we kind of hit it from all different angles. We looked at it from, we've looked at it from culture, we've looked at it from diversity, different types of diversity, multicultural education. We looked at different types of IQ. We've looked at socioeconomic status. It's all those different factors that go into the diverse child.